Hi everyone. Hello, my name is Louise Jose. I'm the marketing coordinator here at CyberClan, and welcome to the latest episode of our monthly webinar series, Incidentally Informed. Today we'll be discussing the topic of effective restoration after a cyber attack. We'll be looking at this from the point of view of the Post Breach Remediation team, legal and insurance teams that would be your first port of call after an attack. I'm joined by a fantastic panel who I will be introducing very shortly. However, right now I will give you a brief introduction to CyberClan and who we are. So over the years, CyberClan have helped thousands of clients through cyber incidents. We also offer risk management services and managed security services as well. We're based across the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and soon the EMEA regions. This enables us to offer global services to the victims of attack and industry professionals alike. So today we are running a poll, which should be popping up onto your screens shortly. There we go. So if you would all like to take part, that would be really helpful for us. So you'll see that we have 6 questions today. In the poll. Has your company experienced a cyber attack? Do you feel that the restoration of critical systems was handled effectively? Do you have an incident response plan in place? How often do you test your incident response plan? Do you have cyber insurance? And do you currently use a managed security services provider, much like us? So there we go. So hopefully we'll be able to see the results of that poll. Unfortunately, it's not letting us share them. Sorry guys, but thank you for everyone who is taking part right now. We'll leave that up for a moment longer. And while we leave that up, I will start to introduce you to our panel. So today we are joined by a wonderful group of guests. We have Lindsay Nichol, who is the Vice Chair of Data Privacy and Security Services at Lewis Brisbois. Ashley Burden, who is the Cyber Claims Manager at CFC. And Chris Halling-Brown, the IT Restoration Manager here at CyberClan. So let me let you introduce yourselves quickly. Can we start with Chris? Chris? Okay, we'll start with Lindsay.
Seems to have a bit of a snafu on Zoom. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go. Yes, Chris. Hi, there you are. So if you'd like to introduce yourself to everyone.
Of course, yeah. So I'm the manager of the Post Breach Remediation department here at CyberClan. Joined about 18 months ago when we were fairly small. I think there was less than 30 of us. We've gone through a huge amount of growth, and we now have over 125 skilled employees across the field handling sort of 300 to 400 cases a year. So as I say, I oversee the PBR team globally for the US, Canada, and the UK. And CyberClan is a full service IR company, so we deal with the IR side of things, the PBR, but we also have, as Louise mentioned, an MSSP department and a risk management services department that works with SCADA systems. My background, I actually, I studied zoology, but ended up in IT, and I've been in IT for over 20 years. I actually moved from a fairly cushy government role to seek the excitement of the cybersecurity world. And as it's been said to me by a few people, I sort of head up a team of Navy SEALs of the IT world to help businesses get their systems back up and running as quickly as possible following a serious cybersecurity incident. So I think that covers it from my side.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Lindsay, your turn. Oh,
I think you're on mute there, Lindsay.
I'm not sure.
Try that. Is that better?
You go, perfect.
I don't know what happened. My settings reverted back. Sorry about that. But as Louise said, I'm a vice chair of the data privacy and cybersecurity team at Lewis Brisbois, and we are a group of lawyers that assist in the response to any type of cybersecurity or data privacy incident. We come in and oversee the investigation, coordinate vendors like the CyberClan team. We also provide legal and compliance and regulatory support for incidents. So organizations that are victims of ransomware attacks or other type of cyber events are often in a crisis situation, and so we provide that support, but they also may have legal responsibilities as a result of an incident. So we assist with investigating, overseeing remediation, and then make sure that the organization's legal responsibilities are handled and that risk is managed and protected.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And we're also joined by Ashley from CFC. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, good afternoon, Louise. Hi, Lindsay and Chris. Thanks for the opportunity. So I'm Ash, work at CFC Underwriting, the cyber claims manager over there. We've got currently 12 adjusters handling cyber on a day-to-day basis, ranging from first to third party. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more ransomware cases now, so I feel I'm fairly well placed to talk on this subject. But yeah, appreciating you asking me to join and look forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. I have just been notified that we are able to now see the results of the poll. So there you go. So 25% of the people joining us today have unfortunately experienced a cyber attack. Luckily, also 25% of them feel that their critical systems were handled effectively. It's great to see that 60% of you, unfortunately 60% of you do have an incident response plan in place, which is great, and a couple of you are building one. And a few of you have never tested your IR plan. We would recommend that you do that. 65% of you already have cyber insurance, and 40% of you already use a managed security services provider. So thank you very much for taking part in that. That was really helpful for us. So we shall move on. Right, here we are. So as I said, today we are discussing the topic of effective restoration after a cyber attack. We will be, as Ashley alluded to, looking at this as the restoration from the point of view of a restoration after a ransomware attack specifically. We will be taking questions at the end. So if there is something that you feel that we have missed off during the discussion that you would like us to delve deeper into, we will hold time for that to discuss that at the end with our panelists as well. So please do send your questions through on the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that those questions are raised at the end. So with our topic in mind, I'd like to start by asking our panelists what some of the key considerations are when hit with ransomware. Now, obviously, if someone does have a cyber insurance policy already in place, their insurer would probably be the first port of call to notify. So, Ash, if we could start with you.
I wish that was true all of the time. It doesn't happen too often, and if it happened more often, I think we'd probably have some better results. But I guess as the insurer, our main concern is always to get the client back up and running as soon as possible. So obviously, before we can do that, we need to truly understand what's happened. And a lot of the time, you're speaking to people at the outset that perhaps don't have that knowledge, but basically it's trying to get in contact with those individuals within the organisation who can give you that real in-depth information. So at CFC, we've got a technically led approach at the outset. So what we'd do, we'd have one of our technical providers, partners such as CyberClan, reach out and triage the incident in the first instance. During that triage, as the name suggests, it's figuring out what's happened and really prioritising and understanding what needs to happen next. Also, during that call, there will be containment advice given as well. And I'm sure Chris will talk to that in more detail. But ultimately, to stop the bleeding and try and sort of halt the attack in its tracks if you can. Most people, what we see, and I don't profess to be a techie by any means, but most people, when they see they're being hit with a ransomware incident, they just pull the plug. And while sometimes that could be potentially the right thing to do, we have seen situations where disconnecting from the network can actually cause further trouble down the line, corrupting data, meaning that it can never be potentially restored. So I think it's really important that first call needs to be to us, I would say, because then we can put you in contact with those technical providers who can give you that hand-holding advice to help in those sort of immediate minutes and hours after the incident. I think it's also really important that we try to fully understand the incident and the capabilities of the client that's been impacted, because then we can really determine what assistance is required. As you'll appreciate, most instances are different in some way, and you can never really have a sort of cookie cutter model, so to speak, but we do have sort of run books and that sort of thing that guide us in terms of what considerations should be made. With respect to ransomware, it often depends on what the threat actor's really done. So in terms of whether they've encrypted or deleted backups as well, because if that's the case, then straight off the bat, almost we need to start having the consideration of potentially there's a ransom payment that needs to be considered, that needs to be put on the table. Also, what we're seeing now is a shift as well in the way these attackers are going about their business in terms of exfiltrating data as well. So previously it was purely encryption, as we all know, and if you had adequate backups, then you could be up and running again fairly swiftly in most instances, and then that was almost it. But now the threat actors are exfiltrating data from the environment as well, which will come to Lindsay's point, I'm sure, around what those legal obligations look like as a result of that data leaving that secure premises. So it's figure out what's happened and then figure out what we need to do to assist the insured to get back up and running again.
So really, like a team like CyberClan's, especially the incident response team who get involved at the very beginning, they, realistically are there to find out exactly what the extent of the issue is, and then obviously help restore those critical systems. But I suppose from the from the victim's point of view, that panic can set in quite quickly, can't it, really? So yeah, we have a dual job.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to have an expert on the line who can calm them down, talk them through the process, and ultimately give them that sort of comfort blanket that they really want, because most of the time it's their first ever incident, and I'm sure it's being in a position of coming into the office on a Monday morning, trying to turn your computer on and it just has a black screen or a ransom note, wherever it may be. It must be a very daunting proposition. So that's where we need those experts that we would bring in. I guess as the insurer, we see ourselves as sort of the project manager as well. So we sit in the middle of all the different vendors that are engaged, legal, technical, PR, etc. And we try to sort of make sure we bring them all together and we're all sort of working in a collegiate manner to help the insured again get back and running again as soon as possible, whilst obviously being fully mindful of any potential legal ramifications that may exist.
Cool. So Chris, from your point of view, it would really be the critical systems and the first steps towards recovery that would be your sort of first port of call as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, we get brought in pretty early, and as Ash rightly said, what I usually find actually is that the degree of panic slowly sets in sometimes. As you said, first time around, they don't really realize the impact or the connotations of what's going on, and as that becomes apparent, then they lean on us for our experience. Going back to what Ash said, in terms of once we are involved, and I think that's an important point, we'll then sort of direct the client to ensure that we stem any of the bleeds. So the critical thing is, don't just start turning systems off, because if it's in mid encryption, it may well corrupt that data. But at the top of my list is usually, let's disconnect that wider area network, the WAN, so the internet connectivity to the site, so that we make sure that the threat actor is ejected from the systems, and any potential further data exfiltration can take place. And then, as Ash said, really looking at where that data is and triaging the situation. So running through all the systems, seeing what's been impacted, what data is available and what is not. Backups are going to be the first critical step to check there, to make sure that we have data that we can recover. And critically, quite often people sort of miss the thought process. If you're backing up to a cloud provider, for example, how quickly can I get my hands on that data? And we've had plenty of cases where the data is held in a backup like Datto cloud storage. And we've got terabytes of data that we've got to get on site. So how do we get that data back in a timely fashion? And then we tend to get involved. We've sort of got a number of game plans and guidelines that we work to. And in many cases, we've talked about incident recovery plans. And we've often found that our clients will put those IR plans aside to leverage our particular guidelines. And what that looks like is to consider a recovery. We tend to tread a line between speed and security to get the business as up and running as fast as possible, but as secure a way as possible. So what that looks like is essentially rebuilding systems into a segregated, what we would class as a green network. And recover the base infrastructure. So, re-architect the network, get the domain running so that we can then start to recover systems and services in a prioritized manner. Get whatever the priorities are, be it email, be it payroll, be it enterprise systems, so that the business can start to become operational as quickly as possible. And then we work our way through that prioritized system plan to get everything else back up online. So yeah, the critical things are, where's the data coming from, and what game plan are we working to? So that tends to be quite a dynamic process depending on the technology and the size of the environment, the number of locations and sites and things like that.
Excellent. Lindsay, so realistically, from a legal point of view, I'm guessing actually controlling the communications around the attack would be, again, your first point at the start of an attack like this.
So a couple of priorities, and you're absolutely right. Controlling communication, being aware of the messaging that is going not just outside of the organization to the public, but also within, to employees, other stakeholders, the board of directors. While there is a lot of benefit to transparency, one of the things that I think that will come out as we go through this discussion is, when you are a victim of a ransomware attack, there are a lot of unanswered questions when you're first responding. Obviously, the crisis situation, evaluating the impact on business, whether the business is interrupted, how quickly we're going to restore operations. And some of those things require immediate communication. What do you tell your employees if they can't log into their computers? And how do we communicate if email is impacted and we need to curtail the use of email communications? But there's also issues about, going too public too fast with too much information before the investigation has been able to get in there and actually determine what is the depth and breadth of this attack. As Ashley mentioned, ransomware has evolved quite a great deal in the last few years to include active efforts by ransomware threat actor groups to exfiltrate data and use it in the extortion process. That obviously causes people a lot of worry. But until we know what variant we're dealing with, whether data was taken and what data was taken, it's important to make sure communications are well drafted, well managed, run by legal, we like to see it, before they go out and can impact the risk management concerns that accompany everything else that is going on in the recovery of an incident.
Fantastic. So we've covered off the key considerations at the beginning of a ransomware attack. The next question that I've got is aimed towards Chris, and that is, what would we say is the average time to recover critical systems after a ransomware attack?
Yeah, and I cover this off at the beginning of many of my cases, as the businesses are really, jonesing to find out when they're going to be able to get back up and running. And the average downtime for a ransomware incident at the moment, if you go out and Google it, you're looking at, it's moved up from 12 days to about 16 days of downtime. 66% of companies would say it would take more than 5 days to recover. But of course, those recovery timeframes can vary wildly. In some unusual situations, they're only down for a day or two, and that's really where we have those IR plans and we can execute on them quickly, and the backups haven't been compromised, and we can get the business up and running very quickly. But most companies fall somewhere between the range of 2 to 4 weeks. Now, what I tell my clients is that with our involvement, we can move that up pretty quickly. And it's not as simple as, that 2 to 4 weeks. That might be, covering a lot of the outlying systems. But what we aim to achieve is to focus on that base infrastructure and the network re-architecture to have a safe landing zone to be able to recover systems into. We then have procedures where we can accelerate the speed of recovery by recovering Active Directory, so the domain that is used by everybody to log on to their systems by all the end users. And we have procedures to be able to secure that, to say that we can then leverage that domain and rescue it into that green network. Once that base infrastructure is in place, it's then back to what I was saying before, where's the data coming from? If we have good backups and we can recover, that's always the quickest way to recovery. But if those backups have been compromised, and we have to look at negotiating with the threat actor to obtain a decryption tool, then our processes to recover those systems are potentially longer, because we have to get the decryption tool. Then we have to ensure that we follow certain processes, because a lot of clients, and I've had to explain this to many people, that by just getting the decryption tool, it's not a golden ticket to recovery. I would never, as putting my system administrator hat on, I would never trust those systems ever again. So once we've decrypted them, once we've backed up the data and then decrypted it, we then have to scrub that data and then apply that data to newly built systems, newly built operating systems, to then look to become functional again.
Wow, so quite complicated to do it after receiving the decryption keys. Other than the actual cost of a ransom, what would you say is the highest cost of a ransom attack? I think probably Ash should be the best person to start with for this one.
I really wanted to say legal and forensics, just given the panel here, but it's not. It's business interruption, I think, and I don't think anyone will be surprised by that. As we know, most companies to some extent rely on data or their systems to do their daily business. And when a ransomware attack hits and it means their computer's either not accessible or their data's not accessible, that's clearly going to have an impact on the business. There's obviously workarounds and going back to pen and paper, but ultimately there is a high chance if ransomware attack hits and they're out for anywhere near the time frames that Chris was talking about, there's a high likelihood there's going to be some form of business interruption, income loss sustained. I guess briefly, it's probably worth breaking that term business interruption down, because people use it, but there's sort of two elements to it. Well, that's the way I see it. So you have the loss of income as a result of the downtime, So insured can't take on, or clients can't take on new business. They're turning away clients, etc. And there's a provable and documentary type loss that they can prove and show that, but for this incident, they would have hit their budgets, and looking at historic performance, etc., will help us get that comfort that what they were saying they would have achieved is actually accurate. And then the second part of business interruption would be the extra expense. So we see this a lot now with overtime costs that are being paid, whether that be the IT team staying working 24, 48, 72 hours to get the systems back online, and we see that fairly often. So there'll be overtime there, or overtime to just catch up, really. So a lot of companies, when they're down, and if they are what we call hard down, they literally can't access their data whatsoever. There's going to be a period where they have to re-input data and that type of thing, and just catch up on the daily functions of their business. So there's cover under our policies as well for that. But we've seen even cases where they're down for a few days. So if it's a company that's got a significant sort of yearly turnover, there's a potential of sort of thousands of pounds being lost in income on a daily basis, really. So it just goes back to the point I sort of started this with. It's always about getting the insurer back up and running again as soon as possible. It's in everyone's best interest, really.
Yeah, and I guess realistically, it's not just about the financial side, although I feel that this could easily affect the financial side as well. But Lindsay, the reputational damage can also lead to a loss of business as well, can't it?
And I think that's one of the primary concerns that organizations have when they're responding to an incident and when they're figuring out how to communicate it, is what are the potential reputational effects? That varies a bit based on industry sector. If a company, a background checking company, is going to have a lot different outcome than, say, an online retailer. If they possess a lot of personal and sensitive information, they may have been placed at risk. It's the reason that as counsel, we want to focus a lot on what is that communication strategy. How much are we telling people, and how much are we comfortable disclosing, and how much can we protect? It's one of the things as part of the legal team, it's one of the superpowers I bring, and that is the privilege protection. There's a lot of speculation about how far it goes, but the honest truth is, when you have lawyers at the table, you have the ability to protect what's going on inside your organization, at least to some extent. That gives you the opportunity to transparently discuss internally, how are we going to communicate this, and how are we going to protect our brand? There are a lot of different strategies, and it's something that I think is very wisely well thought out and discussed with the entire response team. Different ransomware variants bring with it different potential public exposure issues. There are some variants. I've got a number of Conti cases right now, and the Conti group has an online shaming site. And so I've had a lot of discussion with clients about, what if they put something out there? Who's going to know about it? How is it going to be heard? Who's going to pick up on it? But there are other variants that don't ever publish. And so it becomes more of a controlled response, dealing with the interruption that Ash has talked about, and dealing with how we address customers, and less about how do we message what actually happened to us. So in a typical lawyer fashion, it depends on the incident, but because it depends on the incident, it's important to make sure you've got the team around the table having well thought out discussions about how do we address this from a public relations standpoint.
And I think actually, Lindsay, you raise a good point. It's something I meant to touch on in terms of what vertical the business is in. So we've had a number of cases where, for example, it's a manufacturing company, and they're manufacturing a specific product that should they be down for too long, their customers are going to go elsewhere. And once your customer has moved to one of your competitors, winning them back is very difficult. So another consideration to take into account when we're looking at those business downtime costs is, it's not just reputation, it's not just the number of dollars that you're hit with because you're down, but also that future income because of loss of clientele.
Yeah, I think as well, we've got to take into account again the panic side of things there, Lindsay, as well, don't we? So realistically, all it takes is the hit of one computer key just to let all of your clients know what's happened, and that can even be premature, can't it?
It can. And one of the other, when you mentioned panic, and we haven't really brought this part up yet, but as the laws change and as more jurisdictions put in not just data breach notification reporting requirements, but also cyber incident reporting requirements, I have a lot of clients that in that panic, they reach out to regulators because they believe, well, I have a tight timeline. I have 24 hours or 36 hours or 72 hours to report this. And often they don't consult with experts before they make those reports, which means your business is down, you're responding to criminal activity, you're trying to restore operations, and now you have regulators knocking on your door asking questions that you don't have answers to yet. And as the lawyer on the team, those are important considerations. We want to be legally compliant, but sometimes we can back up, take a deep breath, and assess a situation before that panic notification goes out the door and escalates things sooner than it has to be. I think all of us on this panel recognize why regulations are in place and all of the steps that various governments are taking to encourage organizations to secure their environments, to encourage communication with individuals who might need to take steps to protect themselves. But the panic that creates can sometimes actually be really detrimental.
I think maybe just to add to that, the panic can actually sometimes turn into dollars as well, and pounds, in terms of those third-party liability suits and even the group actions that we're starting to see now, and regulatory fines and penalties and stuff as well. So I think it's key to take a breath at the start, bring the experts in, and they'll guide you through the process.
Absolutely.
That's exactly who our panel here are today. So there you are. So assuming that a company didn't have sufficient backups, and we're actually receiving quite a few questions regarding backups at the moment, they're all coming through now. Assuming a company didn't have sufficient backups, would paying the ransom be their last resort? Correct.
So, yeah. And you know, we've talked about this to some extent. You know, where is the data coming from? And you know, the data is what the business relies on at the end of the day. We need to have those records. We need to have those client records for the business to survive. I mean, I've got a particular example in mind where we had a client who it was a small firm, a small publishing company. And their business model was, the business was owned by the employees, and they had sort of in their own minds a different way of looking at things. You know, they weren't just for profit, they were for creating a sustainable and a moral business. And they had a moral stance not to pay the attacker from the onset. They weren't interested in engaging from a moral perspective. And that's great, and we see that quite often. You know, we don't want to fund these activities, but really it comes down to, is my business going to survive? And at the end of the day, our clients are a victim of, if you want to put it in traditional terms, a burglary. You know, and at the end of the day, the client was, it came to light that, you know, the business would be at a high level of risk if we weren't able to recover their systems and recover their data. So we did actually have to go down the route of paying the threat actor so that we could get the decryption tool. And as soon as that floodgate had sort of opened in their minds, they were like, where's the decryption tool? Can we get it? When are we going to get it? And we got it, but it was only, there were problems with the tool. And we were able to decrypt 98% of the data, and we had sort of this 2% hanging around. In the end, we had to go back to the threat actor for support. And it took 4 or 5 weeks of me pinging them and you know, monitoring the communication channels. Was about to give up and give the client the bad news when they came through with this improved decryption tool, and we were able to recover the rest of their files. So really what I'm getting at through that example is, no matter your mindset in terms of trying to do the right thing at the end of the day is for your business to survive and to continue. And so we make those judgment calls based on that, really bearing in mind our clients are victims of an attack.
Yeah, I think it's such a hard call at the end of the day, isn't it? But at the end of the day, it is your business, it's your livelihood, and it's the livelihood of other people as well.
One thing I might add to just before we move on from that is that I will often recommend at least opening a line of communication with the threat actor, whatever your mindset may be, because we can gain intelligence from that. We can also, we've talked about them exfiltrating data as a method of trying to extort that money from our clients, but they've actually added on another layer of attack by what we call DDoSing our clients. So that's a distributed denial of systems, where essentially they'll throw packets of data at our clients' websites and our clients' systems so that they're overwhelmed, and they bring them down, and they'll continue these attacks in order to get your attention and to ensure that you're going to give them some money at the end of the day. And so by bringing us on board, we can make recommendations to protect you by using other technologies to ensure that should they go down that route, that at least it's not going to affect you. But also by opening the lines of communication, we're showing them that we're engaging with them, and whether we intend to pay or not, we can gain some intelligence and hopefully prevent those further steps of extortion, and at least buy us some time to get our ducks in a row.
Wonderful. Ash, what's your perspective on this question?
Yeah, I guess before I get into it, just to add to something that Chris said, the way that these threat actors are going about their business now, we've seen examples where they call, so they actually make a phone call into the CEO or whoever it may be to really sort of put the pressure on them even more to pay. So it just shows that they're becoming more and more brazen. But I guess it's probably going to be repeating what Chris has said, but from our perspective, paying the ransom should always be the last resort when considering how best to recover from a cyber incident. If I had my way, we'd never pay a ransom again. I think the reality is it's a really weird situation we find ourselves in, because we know we're paying criminals, but ultimately a lot of the time insureds just don't have the choice, really. And as Chris said, it's usually a case of if their data, their primary data is encrypted, their backups are encrypted, and their offsite backups or their cloud backups are unusable or encrypted as well, they really don't have a choice. It's either look to consider paying the ransom or potentially go out of business. So it's really that black and white, really. And the moral side of things does come into it at the outset, but as Chris just alluded to there, it gets to a point where moral feelings have to go out the window, and you have to think, well, is there something that I can do to save my business? And we find that more often than not. That's not a position we like to find ourselves in, but it is. But yeah, whilst it's always the last sort of result of responding to an incident and recovering, there are a number of considerations that need to be carefully taken into account when considering paying a ransom. And Lindsay will talk to them around the sanctions and that sort of thing. But extremely important that you don't just go off and pay a ransom without bringing in the experts, making sure that the checks are done, and making sure that you're fully compliant to the extent you can. I guess my last comment there would be, I think this is a watch this space type situation at the moment. I think with these more high profile attacks on infrastructure and that sort of thing, the government are becoming more and more involved, and I think it's a matter of time until they do something. I'm not sure what that's going to be, but I think it's regulatory involvement here is going to be interesting to watch over the next 12 to 24 months for sure, because I think something needs to be done. We're coming out of COVID, but we're going into a ransomware epidemic, I think, and something needs to be done. What that is, I don't know, but something needs to be done.
I mean, I totally agree with that. From a marketing and PR perspective, I spend a lot of time reading the news, and you just see more and more and more speculation over what different governments are going to do, whether that's the UK government or specifically the Biden administration as well seems to be very on cyber at the moment. Lindsay, what would the legal implications be of paying a ransom?
So to add to all of the discussion that we've had so far, there are always questions about, well, is it legal for me to do this? What concerns do I need to have? And there's been a lot of discussion about that, particularly over about the last 6 to 8 months. It has long been the FBI's perspective, and probably most law enforcement, if not all law enforcement, like we said here, that paying a ransom is a last resort. Nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, gosh, today I want to buy Bitcoin and give it to a cyber criminal. It's never anyone's plan. And that is actually the mantra of all of us in this space. We want to consider all the other options. But as we've already said, there are some circumstances where for a client, and with my role as the client's advocate, sometimes paying the ransom is something that they have no choice in order to maintain the business and to be able to recover. The legal requirements with paying a ransom right now are actually relatively simple. So while the FBI doesn't recommend it, it's not illegal. There are just things that you should do. One of those is make sure that you report the incident to law enforcement. Make sure that there is a record of it. Reporting an incident to the FBI, at least, or to the Secret Service does not make it public. The FBI is not going to swoop in and save the day. They don't have for most of these variants, they don't have decryptors in their back pocket, unfortunately. But they do aggregate information about these incidents, and they do investigate and sometimes successfully take threat actor groups down. And so I always encourage my clients to cooperate with the FBI to the extent they are comfortable, because it really does contribute to the greater good. We are also seeing, I can comment on this, the FBI within the last probably 2 to 3 months has become a lot faster and more aggressive on responding to the reports that we make to them. There was a point in time where we would put in our report through the online IC3 cybercrime reporting portal, and we would wait 2 to 3 months sometimes to hear back from them. Now we're hearing from dedicated agents usually within a week, if not 3 to 4 days. And the agents that we are hearing from are agents assigned to the specific variants that we're dealing with. So the Sodinokibi crew or the Conti crew or the Hello Kitty crew, we're hearing from specific agents that are familiar with those variants. The other aspect before you pay a ransom is to make sure that you do the OFAC check. The Office of Foreign Assets Control through the U.S. Department of the Treasury. That list, the OFAC check just checks to make sure that you're not making a ransom payment to a known terrorist or designated nation state actor that, at least from the U.S. side, that the government has said, no, we are not going to let you pay. If you make that payment, you actually may be doing something illegal and could get in trouble. And so that check needs to be done. And as we've talked about repeatedly on this call, that's where having experts to help is critically important. When you engage with a threat actor to communicate, and I think I saw this question roll by, and it's a good one, we use expert vendors like CyberClan to engage in those negotiations, to communicate with the threat actor, sometimes by email, sometimes through dark web chat room. And then those experts help us clear that OFAC check, document that we're not paying someone we're not supposed to pay, as well as facilitate obtaining the Bitcoin and the transaction itself. I always tell clients, do not try to do this yourself. There are very, very skilled people that help and can make this process go much smoother if it is a process you have to undertake. And I tell people, and then when you go home, you feel like you have to take a shower. But if you had to do it to save your business, there are ways to get it done legally, appropriately, and in a way that will protect your organization as much as possible.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, actually, in terms of sanctions checks. When we go through this process, we do make a point of doing a full sanctions check across various, I think we have 7 different checks that we do, including Japan, EU, Switzerland, the US, and the like, and that's certainly an important step.
Just to round that off, there's obviously under insurance policies, there's in most, if not all of, there's a sanctioned exclusion as well. So that ties into the coverage element as well. So it all sort of comes together. Not are you just risking going to prison, but you're also risking not being reimbursed by your insurer. So yeah, speak to the experts.
Wow. Thanks a lot, guys. So so now we've looked at basically, you know, the ransom itself, paying that ransom. But once the ransom's been paid, what would that restoration process really look like? We've already sort of covered that it would be a bit of a messy process, but if we could maybe look at that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, and I think I can cover off a lot of that, because we do have to make these recommendations to our clients. So when we get that decryption tool, the first thing that we're going to do is sandbox it, test it, make sure that there's nothing malicious in there that we don't want, make sure that it works. We'll then pass that to our client with a whole bunch of instructions and support to get that process going. So there are a couple of things that I think are worth pointing out here, just for everybody's edification. First of all, it's not off-the-shelf software. You know, this has been developed by a threat actor in their bedroom, and we do see problems with the decryption tools. So the first protocol is make sure anything that you've got you want to decrypt is backed up, so that if there is a problem, we have a second shot at it. And we often see issues with large files having problems decrypting, as well as if files have too long a name, essentially, if they're dug down under 10 layers of folders, and they have a paragraph describing what that document is, a lot of times that can prove problematic. In cases where the decryption tool doesn't work, then we'll often go back to the threat actors, and they do operate as a business, funnily enough, and that was one surprise getting involved in this sector as to how much of a business it does operate. They have a support department, they have a customer services department that we go to, describe the issue, and as I mentioned earlier, they will often make changes to the tool so that it then works better in the environment that we're looking at. Quite often get asked by our clients if we will do that for them, and if they can send us the data and we'll decrypt it and send it back to them. But of course, that's going to slow down our process. So we're usually going to look to decrypt that data in situ, and we're going to do that offline. So we're going to make sure that anything that we're decrypting is hold away, is done in a secure process. Once that data is decrypted, then, as I mentioned earlier, we can't just reuse those systems. We can't trust those systems. So we do have some processes to scrub the data, to run antivirus scans, to make sure that there's nothing dropped in the file data that is of concern. We're then going to leverage some techniques that we've developed over time to recover specific systems in as timely a fashion as possible. So, for example, a commonly used system on the Microsoft stack would be something called ADFS. So that's Active Directory Federated Services, that would be used to enable your end users to single sign on to cloud platforms like Office 365. And so that's, as you can imagine, quite a critical system for many businesses that leverage these cloud platforms. And they need to get that system back up and running. So as an example, there is a tool that Microsoft provides to back up that configuration. So we'll run a backup of that configuration on the decrypted machine. We'll then move that configuration over to that backed up configuration to the new server that we've cleanly built in the green environment that I mentioned earlier, and apply that configuration, restore it, get it back up and running, and we've had ADFS up and running within a couple of hours, just as an example. So I think really the whole decryption process, as I mentioned, isn't a magic bullet. Really, the best way to recover is from backup. But given the fact that your backups may have been compromised, and we've gone down the path of a decryption tool, following our processes can really speed that along. And I think that's probably one of the most critical elements that given that a lot of our clients haven't had to go through this process before, have a misunderstanding and really need that guidance.
Fantastic. I think that was really very insightful there. So thanks a lot, Chris. So realistically, what can a company do to make sure that they are prepared in case of a ransom attack? Is one of my last questions. I've got one after this, but I feel that this is the one most people are asking about in the questions.
Right, and I noticed is the first question that came in, right?
In fact, yeah.
What's the plan for before an attack? Are we recommending offline encrypted backups of critical data? And certainly we do. To have what we would call an out-of-band backup, so that it's succinct from the rest of the network, only has specific paths to be able to get to that backup data. And one term you may not have come across that I think is certainly worth investigating is to have immutable backups, and there are lots of services that provide that. And that essentially means the backups cannot be changed, because we'll often see backup systems that have their backups within the network essentially shared as a file share and become encrypted, just like any of the other data that has become encrypted in the environment. So backups are extremely important, but not just having that. Having the backups is the safety net. I mean, we often see if they can't get to those backup files, if they realize because they've been in the environment for a period of time that the backups are on a specific storage device, we found that they will just get into that storage device and just clear it out, just clear all the pointers, so that data becomes unusable at that point. So yes, immutable out-of-band backups is top of the list. As well as having a good IR plan and testing that IR plan, hence our questions at the top of the poll there. Really testing that IR plan is going to be critical to make sure that it's a fluid motion when you come to call on it. I would say that a lot of IR plans that I've seen with our clients don't take into account the effects that ransomware have. So really an IR plan may be more of a disaster recovery plan, that if the data center catches on fire, how do I recover from that? Well, I've got a second site, but they don't take into account somebody getting into the environment, learning the environment, and taking out that disaster recovery site as well. So really changing the mindset of your IR plan, and if you have one already, I would certainly recommend going back and looking at it with a set of eyes that somebody's got into my environment, they've learned my environment, they have domain admin credentials throughout and can get to every piece of my environment. What do I do and how do I protect myself in that eventuality, and how do I ensure that I've got somewhere that I can recover to that they wouldn't necessarily have been able to access? I would say next on my list is people. People are going to be one of the biggest things to take into account. So make sure your people are educated. And we often talk about the main methods that threat actors use to get into environments. 80% are through either OpenRDP or through a phishing attack. And that's where the people come in, and making sure that they understand how to see what a phishing email is, what to do if you notice a phishing email, and not to open things or click on things that you're not sure of. And then we often recommend, and we do offer services that we'll come in, we'll craft emails that look just like it's come from your accounting department, and we'll send it out, and essentially it's a phishing test. So we'll see how many people in your organization click on those links, and then we can focus on those people to ensure that that education is reinforced. From a technical perspective, there are a few other things that I would certainly put at the top of the list. Patching, making sure that not only your operating systems are fully patched in a timely fashion, but also your firmware of your devices, the things you might not think of, your switches, your load balancers, and those things have the necessary patch levels and are kept up to date, especially systems that are outward facing, that are facing the internet. A couple of things that I think are important that are often missed is know where your data is. So have good documentation of your systems, of your network, know where your critical data is, so that if you do come to a point where you need to recover quickly and you need to prioritize your systems, that you already understand where that data is and what systems we can recover as a priority. There are a number of other sort of recommendations that I can fly through, not wanting to take up everybody's time here, but having a zero trust mindset, having a next-gen endpoint detection and response system in place. And it is not just having that EDR, so it's that sort of antivirus on steroids, if you will. It's a system that will block and contain anything and does its work through AI and behavior monitoring. And essentially, we offer a service that covers that kind of thing, where we have an endpoint detection and response system that we push out to our clients. And then it's not just having that in place, but how it's configured very aggressively in our case. And the critical thing is it monitored? You know, when that alert comes in at 2 in the morning, who's watching it? And that's where our SOC comes in. So our security operations center is 24/7 and is constantly monitoring those systems. As soon as that alert comes in, somebody can react and respond to it in a timely fashion. Another aspect that I think is very important that is often overlooked is to ensure that nobody has local administrative rights over their endpoints, and that's controlled. But also local admin accounts are often configured to have the same password. And that's where something like Microsoft's LAPS system comes in. So that's local administrative password system. And that essentially cycles the local admin passwords and makes sure that every device or endpoint in the environment has its own succinct password associated to the local administrative privileges. And then there's some things like ensuring that SMB version 1, so that's essentially a file sharing protocol, is turned off. And I mean, I could go on for days about the recommendations that we would make, but that's sort of the high level things that I think are important in these situations.
I think really as well, like one of your main points as well there is just knowing where all your files are, mapping out your systems, knowing where everything is stored, and making sure that you have good knowledge of your systems and what your priorities are when bringing that data back online as well. Lindsay, so as well as having your systems in place and knowing where they are and that data as part of your IR plan, another element of that would be also making sure that the teams who would be involved from an internal perspective as well have some sort of idea about who to notify and when as well, wouldn't it?
And that's the critical aspect of incident response planning. So not just having an incident response plan, but also testing it, making sure you know what those communication chains look like, and making sure you know who the stakeholders are in a particular incident. When we talk about these types of incidents, they sound like they happen very linearly, but they actually don't. Lots of things happen all at one time. And so if someone logs into a server and they see a ransom note, that person needs to know who to call. And then that person needs to know, how do we get insurance on the phone? And what I tell people is, take that insurance policy that you have, look at it. Look at the panels. Who are the forensics teams that are approved by the insurance company? Who are the legal teams? Who are the negotiating teams? And don't be afraid to reach out to us, talk to us. We'll answer your questions. You can get to know us so that all of this can happen faster. That testing of an incident response plan and opening up awareness about the communication channels moves the response much more quickly, controls the uncontrollable things that can make the risk higher, like external communication or regulatory communications happening before you get legal involved. All of those things, when you practice them and when you test them, can help outline how a response should go. So instead of waiting on one thing to happen to get to the next, I've got forensics going, I've got insurance going, I've got legal going, I've got IT, I've got boots on the ground if I need it. All of those things can happen simultaneously. So testing that process can actually reduce your downtime, speed up the recovery, and give you a lot more options, because it's going to include testing the backups and knowing where they are and having those communication channels outlined. So it can make a huge difference.
I think also as well, knowing and having some knowledge of exactly how things are brought back online, who you're notifying, and having that plan in place and making sure those people are aware of it also helps limit the panic element when unfortunately an incident like this also happens, and also means that you sort of already have some of the answers to the normal standard first questions, like how long is this going to take, who do I notify first, and all of that sort of stuff as well. And Ash, I'm guessing realistically you would recommend having a very good insurance policy in place.
Yeah, so the guys have taken all my content, so I'm out apart by a comprehensive insurance policy. I think a lot of people see it as just an outlay, where it's really part of your disaster recovery incident response setup as a company. It's different to a lot of other insurance policies that are purely reactive. There are risk management services that are attached to these policies as well, but it basically gives the client 24/7 access to specialists at the drop of a hat. So they're sitting there waiting to assist in these type of instances. So it's really key that people, as Lindsay said, once they take out these policies, get familiar with it, understand the coverages, understand the process around the claims, claim setup and that type of thing. The one big piece of advice I would strongly recommend is please do not store your insurance policy on your servers if at all possible. Reason I say that is because we've had some situations where clients have been attacked by ransomware and the threat actors have actually obtained a copy of the policy schedule. And as soon as they know you have insurance out there, it puts Chris and his team from a negotiation standpoint on the back foot times 10. You're already in a position where the threat actor knows you have X amount in insurance coverage. So try and keep that offline to the extent you can. I guess just to add to a couple of points, I think just picking up on what Chris was saying, understanding the environment, I think that's key. Understanding what vulnerabilities you may have as well. Obviously, the threat landscape is changing on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis, but it's good to try and understand what vulnerabilities you've got, such as the remote desktop protocol that Chris mentioned there before, and taking relatively straightforward actions to mitigate those vulnerabilities and that type of thing. Carrying out roundtables as well to pick up on what Lindsay said. I think it's always good to know the players before you have an incident, because a lot of the time hair's on fire, you're running around and you just not got that sort of clear and concise mindset. So knowing the partners, knowing the process beforehand. And then lastly, just picking up on risk management again and what Chris said around the phishing exercises, education as well, and ransomware simulations and that sort of thing. So just sort of testing it, wargaming it before it actually happens. So when it does, because it might sound a bit downbeat, but it's not really a matter of if, it's more when now. And I think you need to be prepared for it. So probably echoing a lot of what these guys said, but it shows how aligned we are, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, in our last webinar, we actually it became very apparent that COVID's changed a lot, especially with regards to the type of people who are being attacked, the type of businesses as well. It's not just limited to large companies like your Amazons, etc. It's small business as well. So everyone is at risk. They are not just getting more aggressive with attacks as well, as changing who they're attacking. So as Ash pointed out, they're not just willing to send you a printout to all of the printers on your network anymore, or an email to everyone within the company. They are willing to pick up the phone. It is becoming a lot more aggressive, and unfortunately can be quite a bit more scary. And that's where the human firewall element really comes in, doesn't it? Making sure your employees understand what to do in the face of an attack, but also how to mitigate that as well, making sure they're not clicking on those phishing emails, not clicking on documents that need to be unzipped, and things like that as well from people that they don't necessarily know.
I might also add, Louise, attending a webinar like this and essentially keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on, and what sort of calls to mind there is the recent Haffian exploit. So that's the zero-day exploit that occurred for Microsoft's on-prem exchange systems. Making sure you're aware of these things as and when they come out, so that you can react in a timely fashion, is going to be critical. So, following up, reading the news, following specific cybersecurity elements, and also, you know, attending these webinars so you get that insight is also a potential point to make.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Finally, we have our Q&A session. We've had quite a lot of questions that have come through that I think that our panel have already answered. So I'll cover off the ones that I think maybe we could explore further. We've sort of already answered the one that's come through from Ken Higgins at the beginning of our call regarding what's the plan before an attack. So is anyone recommending offline encrypted backups of critical data? I think realistically the answer to that is yes. And then we've got Fadal Halawi here has written, besides recovering and restoring from a ransomware, do you find the origin of the ransomware, for example, which country it's coming from and why?
So that's a question we quite often get asked, and unfortunately it's not realistic in a lot of cases. These threat actors are protected by nation states, or they may be nation state attacks. There are some cases where the money has been followed by the likes of the FBI because they're large payments, and because it's often, you know, Bitcoin that is being utilized, and that has become to some extent more transparent in some ways. They are able to pull it down, and with the recent dark side example, they were able to bring them down. But in most cases, unfortunately, because they hide themselves behind VPNs, they use, you know, stooges, or they are actually sort of in an area and we often give the example, you know, a lot of these ransomwares won't execute if they find the systems are running in specific languages. So those nation states don't have a vested interest in clamping down on it because they're not affected. So they're essentially hidden by that umbrella. So very, very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got one here from Spencer Pollock, and it's for Ash. What is the one consistent hurdle you see from the insurer perspective when dealing with an insured post-ransom attack?
I assume that's more of the insured's had a ransom attack and they tell us after the fact. It's and if my understanding is correct, sort of unpicking what's happened almost initially with the first protocol. We see many situations where insureds, their IT department, their managed service providers wipe the network and then reinstall, and that gets them back up and running again. But then when we come in and ask a question about, well, what data was touched, was any exfiltrated, like, well, we wiped the network. And we've had some situations where, because we couldn't prove to an adequate level that data either wasn't accessed or it wasn't exfiltrated under certain regulations, specifically in the US, we didn't manage to meet that low risk of harm threshold, and meant that we had to go and notify a big population just out of an abundance of caution, really. So I'd say it's when insured takes actions when they feel they're doing things in the right way and they're doing things for the right reason, but it can sometimes harm them further down the line.
Perfect, thank you. Again, Fadal has written here, what are the odds of the files being corrupted during the ransom encryption process, and what do you tell the client if the data gets corrupted? Wow, that's a good question.
That's a tough one, and we do see that. So the odds of the data becoming encrypted is very difficult to put a number on, and I couldn't really do that. Really, the reasons that data becomes corrupted is because either the encryption process has been interrupted. So that speaks to, you know, not turning systems off if you discover they are being encrypted. Allow it to continue through, and then we have to pick up the pieces after. You don't want to make it worse. Also, not turning systems off, and it was something I meant to touch on earlier, is a lot of these ransomware attacks are fileless now. So they just run in memory. So shutting down systems means we lose that forensic evidence. So the better approach is to disconnect the systems from the network, keep the systems live, then we can perform memory forensics and potentially get more information. Corruption may also occur on large files. So we've seen, large databases that are terabytes in size that are potentially at risk of that. In terms of how we deal with it, it's very difficult to deal with, and if we have had some success in the past in leveraging, some of our expert DBAs to delve into that data and recover what can be from the tables, and we'll obviously do our best to assist our clients to recover that data, but it becomes quite complex at that point.
Thank you. Khaled El Hussein has written the top 3 steps in the containment process. Please be as specific as possible. I think this could take a while, couldn't it, Chris?
Well, yeah, we covered that off really. The top 3 steps are notify your insurers, get the right people on board. Talked about severing the WAN, and then looking at what systems have been infected, take a triage approach, and ensure that anything that hasn't been affected is protected, and anything that has been affected is preserved for forensics, and is in a state that we can look to recover. Making sure that you recover into that sort of green network, and you are following best practice approach to recovery. I could go on a long time, so that's quite a large question.
We did sort of cover that off earlier on in the discussion as well, didn't we? Also, from Khaled, when you are hit, do your services instantly stop being available? Considering, for instance, Amazon having a financial loss of $56,000 a minute. So realistically, do your systems become instantly unavailable once you've been hit by a ransom attack?
Well, this is a very specific question, and leveraging an example like Amazon, they will have very distributed systems, and one of the recommendations I think I touched upon was network segmentation, for example, and ensuring that specific systems are held and protected within VLANs, if you will, or specific networks that only allow specific communication to services that are needed. So a threat actor may not be able to get access to them. So in a lot of cases, and we see some other technologies, more proprietary technologies, or some mainstream like AS400s that are not affected. The critical thing there is that, even though some of those services may not be affected, can we really use them in anger, in a business operational perspective, given the nature of the network? And it really depends on your specific situation. But in many cases, we would look to migrate those systems over to our green network and our safe landing zone to then start utilizing them. The critical thing there is really what form of persistence is in the environment, how that persistence could spread. We don't want to be pushed back to stage 1 and have recovered systems and then have them encrypted again. And anything that hasn't been affected, we want to make sure is protected and is only leveraged in a safe way.
Fantastic. Right, there's a few that we've definitely answered throughout our conversations as well.
Probably quite like the last one, and I'm quite interested actually. Does preventative action like doing risk assessments and pen tests to help enhance cyber insurance policy attainment, or does it lower prices? It's certainly something I've been interested in the past.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's probably more of an underwriting question, and I'm on claims, but I can certainly give my view on it. I know some insurers now are looking at those pre-bind assessments that are taking place that give security scores and that sort of thing to guide the underwriting process, and that may or may not result in the policy being bound, and or on what terms, and in respect of lower prices. I'm sure some insurers out there are offering lower prices if you do X, Y, and Z. We're here at CFC, we have a process by which there's a minimum security threshold that our clients need to meet. And if they don't meet that at the binding stage, then we'll either unfortunately not be able to write the risk, or we'll put in place a time or a deadline by which those security enhancements need to be in place by way of an endorsement. And then that could sometimes result in a reduction in premium, or if they don't put those security enhancements in place, then that could ultimately result in an increase in their deductible. So it just shows that it gives an opportunity to our clients to show that they do have skin in the game, and ultimately there is things they can do to help themselves avoid situations such as this that we've spoken about today. Yeah,
and I remember from our initial discussion around the topic pre-webinar, you were saying part of that is actually having multi-factor authentication as part of your critical systems as well, isn't it?
It's so key, and I do appreciate it. It could be seen as a bit of a headache having to go onto your phone or whatever the secondary device is, but it is so key. Having multi-factor on your email tenancy, as well as any virtual private network connections or remote desktop protocol connections, it just gives the threat actors another hurdle to jump over. I'm not saying it would stop all these cases, because these attackers are always developing, and they're always looking for the next way around these things. And we have seen a couple of situations where multi-factor has been overridden by some way, but it would certainly go a long way to mitigate attacks coming through this particular avenue, for sure.
I appreciate that. And actually, something I neglected to mention when I was talking about the recommendations, but we can see multi-factor authentication becoming more mainstream. When you log into your banking service, when you log into anything these days, it'll send you a text to ensure you are who you are, and MFA is one of the best ways of protecting your environment, for sure.
Brilliant, thank you guys. We have one last question that wasn't entered through the Q&A section here. It's from Eric Renata, and it is it better for insureds to keep their critical data in cold storage, and would doing that save time and costs in the short and long term for the restoration process?
So in terms of cold storage, I think what he's probably referring to is something like, AWS Glacier. There's lots of different forms of that. I would certainly agree that having that as part of your backup regime is certainly advantageous. As I mentioned earlier, how do I get that data back in a timely fashion should I need it? And that's going to be critical. And something like an AWS Snowball, you could potentially write that into your IR plan and test it and look at the SLAs surrounding that. So what that would be is where, for example, if you have data in AWS's cold storage facilities, they'll be able to put that data onto a device that they can then ship to you. But you've got, the copy times to take into account, the transport times, and then the copy times at your end. So is that going to set me back a week to get that data before I can start recovering? So those are the things to really take into account when you're looking at leveraging those services. And writing those things into your IR plan is the practicality, and that really speaks to the testing process.
Wonderful. Well, we've covered a lot in a very short space of time. I know we've actually run over by 20 minutes, but considering the subject matter and the wonderful panelists that we've had on board and their knowledge of everything that we've discussed today, I think it's been a really worthwhile webinar. We've actually already had some great feedback already from some of the attendees. So thank you so much for taking part in today's webinar, being part of our panel, everyone. And also thank you to everyone who has attended. We will be sending out the link so that you guys can all rewatch, share with your friends, share with people that you think might have missed out on today. That should hopefully be coming through to you in the next couple of days. And in the meantime, we will be hosting another webinar next month. Please do make sure that you sign up and follow us on LinkedIn for any updates regarding that. But thank you so much for all of your time and your wonderful answers. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.